Answer. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Dan and Amy, as we discussed earlier, Mike Scott's been reporting. Yesterday, Ron DeSantis ended his presidential bid and endorsed Trump.
It's clear to me that a majority of Republican primary voters want to give Donald Trump another chance. They watch his presidency get stymied by relentless resistance, and they see Democrats using lawfare this day to attack him. Well, I've had disagreements with Donald Trump, such as on the coronavirus pandemic and his elevation of Anthony Fauci. Trump is superior to the current incumbent, Joe Biden. That is clear. I signed a pledge to support the Republican nominee, and I will honor that pledge. He has my endorsement because we can't go back to the old Republican guard of yesteryear, a repackaged form of warmed-over corporatism that Nikki Haley represents. The days of putting Americans last, of kowtowing to large corporations, of caving to woke ideology are over.
And that was after Senator Tim Scott endorsed Trump, and you had a full complement of Trump surrogates on the Sunday talkies, including Sarah Huckabee Sanders over the weekend, to try to help push Trump across the finish line tomorrow in New Hampshire. Not to mention Trump himself rallying in Rochester over the weekend and visiting campaign offices and the like. And here's the problem I have with Nikki Haley, for those who want to extend this campaign beyond New Hampshire. And it's not going to. Even if Nikki Haley were to somehow pull out a surprise victory, the numbers in South Carolina and beyond are not particularly formidable.
Not there for her. Yeah,
and really there's no reason to believe that's going to change, because there's no principles at stake when Nikki Haley talks politics. It's just political positioning. So how can you trust it? I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is back before the Iowa caucus. Nikki Haley on a radio station there in Iowa being asked the trans question: can a man become a woman? Can a man become a woman? Is a man who pretends to be a woman the same thing as a biological woman? That's the question. It's an important one, actually. It's sort of a foundational principle, because all sorts of public policy debates start and move in different directions depending on how you answer that question. Here's how she answered it.
Now, can a man become a woman? There's been a lot that's been talked about when it comes to all of these roles and all of these issues. I strongly believe that we should not allow any gender change surgeries to anyone before the age of 18, period. Kids now can't get a tattoo until they're 18. We shouldn't have them permanently change their body until they're 18, and that includes puberty blockers. That includes any sort of hormones that would do that. After the age of 18, we want to make sure people can live any way they want to live. I don't think government needs to be in control of anybody's life. You go live the way you want to live. You should be free to live the way you want to live. And government and everybody else should stay out of your way. But prior to 18, it is an important time, especially when you're going through your teenage years, that can be confusing. I don't think we should ever in any way have any sort of permanent changes. But after 18, I'm not going to say anything. I think that, you always have to believe in freedom and allowing people to live the life the way they want to live. And if that's how they choose, then, I don't think government should have any say in that.
Mm-hmm. After 18, I'm not going to say anything, that phrase in particular. Well, Jonah Wheeler is a state rep in New Hampshire. He's a Democrat. He took to the floor of their legislature to explain his position on legislation in New Hampshire to ban trans surgeries on kids, exactly what Nikki Haley was referencing there in her answer. Here's what Jonah Wheeler had to say as a liberal Democrat, self-identified.
And despite the fact that I am a liberal, despite the fact that I believe in non-discrimination for trans people for gay people, for queer people, and that I will fight until my very last day, until they are recognized as human beings. The question before us is whether or not children under the age of 18 should be able to get these surgeries. And I, despite being a liberal who believes in those human rights, do not think that is the case. And when the question is put before me, and I spoke to people until 11:30 last night, lobbyists, different stakeholders, people with firsthand experience, lived experience, and I've been speaking to people for the last 4 weeks about this bill, the only argument against it being that this opens the amendment specifically opens the door to other bad trans bills. But folks, the slippery slope fallacy I don't think applies here. We're talking about whether or not kids should get these surgeries, and they should not. These are irreversible surgeries. And despite the fact that there are medical exceptions which are included in this amendment, when people have problems with their genitals that need to be addressed, that should be addressed. But when we're talking about whether or not kids should get these surgeries, I think that goes a bridge too far, and I will not be signing on to that. So
Jonah Wheeler, liberal Democrat, doesn't use the Nikki Haley doesn't use the rhetorical flourishes of a Jonah Wheeler, the fight to recognize gay and trans people as human beings. That's ridiculous. Of course they're human beings, and there's no dispute. That's a typical straw man argument of the left. But he's just taking a political position. And he's taking a political position starting from the premise that, a man can become a woman, just not before the age of 18. So, Nikki Haley, I'm not going to say anything about it after the age of 18. I'm not saying that there needs to be laws about these things necessarily, but I think you have a responsibility as a civic leader, as the leader of the country and the free world, to make statements of principle on issues like this. Because, for example, if you don't say anything about what should happen after the age of 18, then what do you say about Leah Thomas competing against women at the collegiate level?
And maybe possibly at the Olympic level.
Yes. And what do you say about the American Boxing Association allowing men to fight women? There are issues beyond the age of 18 that may not require federal action, that may be the wrong avenue to address these cultural issues. But you have to provide moral clarity if you want to lead. And Nikki Haley doesn't provide moral clarity because she doesn't speak in the parlance of principles. She speaks in the parlance of political positioning on issues. And that's a very different thing. I mean, you can still politically position yourself once you've established what your core principles are. Say, this is the way I'm going to translate my principles into politics. And this is maybe in some instances the incremental approach we're going to have to take to ensure that the law and the culture reflects the norms that I'm discussing as foundational for the way I think about public policy and culture. But she doesn't talk like that because that's not who she is. And she's proved it over and over again, not just on this campaign or during this campaign, but also when she was governor of South Carolina, which is why this is going nowhere. Because she's up against a movement. And even with Trump's promiscuity when it comes to positions on issues, past and even sort of in real time, it's still a movement that has a defined why and a how and a what. And Nikki Haley's campaign just doesn't. Neither did Ron DeSantis's. And that's why it, started really in the pole position in December of 2022 and now didn't even finish the race.
He didn't even make it to New Hampshire.
We're pleased to be joined by State Representative Mike Moffett. He's a current state rep in New Hampshire. He's a retired professor and Marine Corps officer, also an author and a columnist. You can get his musings at Michael Moffett blogspot.com, two F's, two T's, Michael Moffett blogspot.com. Representative Moffett, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan and Amy, haven't talked to you since 2020.
I know.
Still,
Been a while.
still out
Yeah. Good to see you're still engaged out there, and great to talk to you again. So give us your handle on the landscape. I mean, is there a possibility that Nikki Haley can spring an upset tomorrow?
Yes, Dan and Amy, or Amy and Dan, absolutely. And I know you all track this. Governor Sununu matters, and his endorsement was for Nikki Haley, and he's been working extremely hard, traveling the state with her and for her. So that has mattered. And her climb has been steady from 2%, steadily increasing now into the whatever it is, depending on the poll, 35 or 40%. So it looks like Trump has a double-digit lead in most polls. Some have it closer. But I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be very interesting and exciting. There's only two of them left. The key thing is independence. Here in New Hampshire, it's an open primary, and independents can vote. Independents breaking strongly for Nikki. Republicans are definitely mostly for Trump at this point. So anyway, should be very interesting and exciting. And tomorrow it is.
And what about Biden supporters? I know he's not on the ballot because they chose South Carolina to be the first primary state, but there's a write-in effort. Can you explain that?
Yeah, there sure is. So Biden in 2020 finished fifth in New Hampshire. He left during the primary day, and left his supporters, flew to South Carolina, made what I think is a Faustian bargain with Jim Clyburn to have a woman of color as his vice president, and also to give first in the nation to South Carolina, which he tried to do. So the DNC has not recognized the Democrat primary here, but our New Hampshire law requires us to go first. So there is a unsanctioned pirate primary, if you will, on the Democrat side. Biden is not on the ballot. A number of other names are Marianne Williamson, and also Dean Phillips, congressman from Minnesota. And so to avoid the embarrassment of Biden getting smacked, the establishment Democrats are trying very hard with a write-in campaign to have people write him in. So it'll be interesting, very interesting on that side too, to see how well President Biden does with this write-in campaign. We'll find out tomorrow night. But I think it's a shame that the president has decided to take the course that he took.
Do you think that will stick with New Hampshire voters in the general election, and Biden and Trump, and they'll remember this, and that will provide a material benefit to Trump in what's usually pretty close state when it comes to presidential races?
Sure, and I can tell you guys are political experts from your questions. Yes, it will hurt Biden in New Hampshire, which Trump lost by 3,000 in 2016, very, very close. So I think it definitely will hurt Biden here. New Hampshire only has 4 electoral votes, but they matter. New Hampshire is the only state in the Northeast since 1988 to ever go Republican in the general election, and that happened in 2000. And those 4 electoral votes in 2000 is what gave George W. Bush the presidency. So New Hampshire can and has mattered despite its size. And so if Biden loses those 4 electoral votes because he blew off New Hampshire, that could cost him.
What about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? How's he doing there?
Well, that's interesting too. He was initially running as a Democrat with extremely powerful name recognition, and then he pulled out of the Democrat side. He's kind of pressured out by the Biden people and folks like that. And other folks didn't care for some of his positions. So he's running as an independent, and I'm not hearing a whole lot about him. He won't be on the ballot because he's not on the Democrat team anymore. So very little, very, very, very little about RFK Jr. Happening here at this time.
The Trump indictments, just looking ahead to a general election, the independent-minded New Hampshire voter, the live free or die type, how do they look at the Trump indictments and when the prospect that Trump might be convicted of some felonies, maybe a convicted felon running for president on the ballot in November? Do you think they factored that in already, and there are just other issues that are motivating the votes of swing voters in New Hampshire general election with a view to the general election, or that the outcome of those trials will have a significant impact moving those voters one direction or the other?
Yeah, good question, Dan. That perplexes me, honestly. These indictments is 91 four different jurisdictional areas where Trump has a total of 91 felony indictments. That troubles a lot of independents in particular. I'm surprised that it hasn't impacted him more on the Republican side, but I have learned that he's got a core, some call it a cult, a core group of supporters for whom he can do no wrong. As he himself once said, he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and he wouldn't lose much support. So that support perplexes me, but it is real, it is there. But beyond that core, independents, I think we'll see this tomorrow in New Hampshire when Haley gets whatever she gets. She's got a majority from the polls. So the majority of independents support Haley. So Trump's legal problems have not impacted that much with his core. But and that's a problem for me as a Republican, seeing him move forward if he does project to be the nominee. Is all this legal stuff, I think, is just could be a killer.
But I mean, it's one thing to vote for Haley in a primary when you have an option, and you're center right or you're leaning center right this cycle, and you have a choice. So I'm sending a message. I'm supporting Haley. I prefer to have Haley. When Haley is gone, which will likely be in the not too distant future, then that choice between Trump and Biden. I've talked to enough people, too, that don't like Trump, but are like, this time around, I just want a Republican to win. I actually don't even care because we just have to get these guys out. The guys that are in now, they have to go, starting at the top. And I just wonder if that's an attitude that you're hearing among your friends and colleagues and constituents as well.
Yeah, there is an attitude or a perspective that I am hearing from friends, constituents, and folks around here. But you mentioned or the need for Republicans to, beat Biden if Biden makes it to November. That's why a lot of folks were intrigued and still are, including myself, with Nikki Haley, because she, by every poll that does this, matching up Republican candidates to Biden, Nikki did the best by far. Wall Street Journal poll had her beating Biden by 17. She, I think, was and remains the strongest general election candidate that we could put up on the Republican side. Trump and Biden, it's pretty even. With all of Trump's problems and baggage, he still is like with 2 to 4 points typically ahead of Biden in these polls, which says something about how horrible Biden is perceived. Sure.
Representative Mike Moffett, he's a state rep in New Hampshire, retired professor and Marine Corps officer, also an author and columnist. You can see Mike's reviews of what's happening in New Hampshire. He's on the ground there. Michael Moffett, blogspot.blogspot.com. Michael Moffett, 2 F's, 2 T's, Michael Moffett, blogspot.com to follow Mike Moffett in New Hampshire and the goings on there. Representative Moffett, thanks again for joining us. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan and Nate.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Hi, this is Carl Amari.
I'm Lisa Wolf. Join us every Saturday night beginning at 8 p.m. for all things entertainment on Hollywood 360.
If you love classic radio shows, The Shadow, Jack Benny, The Lone